discussions. Faculty, staff, and students, and community are doing around these issues. Okay, so here we are, the socio-ecological climate impacts in the North. Our stellar panel consists of, and then I'll get back to it. We have Kristen, Kieta, doing a PhD in Natural Resource Environmental Studies. Thank you. The dissertation topic is determining sources of sediment in the Nechaka River Basin using the sediment fingerprinting technique. Too cool. Okay, then we have Annie King next to her, doing her master's in Natural Resource and Environmental Studies, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that when she comes up to present. And I've asked each one of them to actually just give a bit of a blurb about themselves, because I love context, right? Then on the end, we have Dr. Joe Shea, the Assistant Professor of Environmental Geomatics and in the Jargon program. Research expertise, snow, glaciers, climate change, hydrology, mountains. And of course, Dr. Art Freeman, Professor of Ecosystem Science and Management and Director of the Natural Resource and Environmental Studies Institute. Again, Dr. Freeman will be giving a little bit of context, especially as it relates to the topic today when he comes up to speak. So without further ado, any questions, comments? Should we get rolling? All right, so who would like to go first? Awesome!
Why not?
Let's break the ice.
And this way I get to steal all the little nuggets that these guys are. I'll try not to get that.
So, yeah, I was just going to say, organizer, with the Zoom, is it okay if is Art still on here?
That's good.
Awesome. Take her away, Brenda. And of course, I'm timing you at 7.
So context, I'm going to retire at the end of June. So I come through a career looking at climate change impacts on forests. And so here I am, 26.5 years later, still working on the same kind of thing. I'm not going to talk too much about forests today on carbon. I think I'll talk a little bit more generally, because the idea is to bring some ideas about solutions and things that we can do.
Oh, thank you, Art.
And to me, that's the real thing, because I think I've got some real positive things that all of us can do. Not only that we should do, but that we must do. You've heard about the Code Red that came out with the last IPCC statement. We are in dire trouble, okay? We need to take action, but the good news is, as I said, lots of things that we can do. These are the things that we must do, but even so, if we do them now, we're going to avoid a lot of pain and grief later. So it's really worth it. And a lot of these are kind of what I would call win-win-win-win things. And I'm sure you guys will have some of these things too to say. Hopefully I don't steal your fire too much. So how did I get here? How did I get into climate change in the beginning? I did a postdoc at Stanford, and it was meant for me to be working in Mexico in the Yucatan Peninsula, which I did for a couple of years. Amazing project looking at the physiological ecology of piper species, which are, the pepper group, and phenomenal diversity of piper in the Yucatan. And so, wonderful project, but it came to an end, and I wasn't ready to leave Stanford yet. So, wonderful place to study and do research. And so my boss at that point had already started getting into the IPCC's reports. He was, in fact, awarded the gold medal in Stockholm with his Nobel Prize for being one of the really early people that was getting into the climate change thing, trying to figure out, in those days, the climate change hadn't happened too much. But what had happened, though, was the CO2 concentrations were going up. And so he was an author on the very first IPCC report, that kind of thing, 1990 more or less. And he said, I think we need to work on this project. So I ended up working on enhanced greenhouse gas concentrations and temperature and how they influence plant systems. And remember that plant systems are the foundation of our food web and our food, on our life support systems, right? Our plants. And so, yes, I was in there, and then of course here I am now, still working in that area. So, fascinating opportunity, and so glad that he did move into that area. It was we got a lot of great field experiments. So here's my thing. I probably used up a lot of my time already. So I'm good. Oh, what? Oh, 5 minutes. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to say a little bit about our climate. I think you guys probably have more to say about this. But I was really interested to find out that our minimum temperatures in winter are probably have shown the greatest change. And they say since the 70s, maybe 9 degrees less cold. And that's one of the outcomes, is that our temperatures aren't so much warming up as they are in general, getting less cold. Now, some people out there might say, oh, good, excellent, because I don't like the really cold weather. I grew up in Saskatoon, so I have no trouble with cold. But the problems are massive. It might sound good, but think of the mountain pine beetle epidemic. Probably all have some memory of that. It already is receding into the past, but that took out over 50% of the live-oak pine trees in BC. Massive impact. We're still recovering from it, and some areas like Fraser Lake and so on have been really hurt badly by this effect. So we need to think beyond just our human comforts. We need to think about the whole life support system that supports our lifestyles, our industry, our incomes, everything. We don't know even the extent of this, but we keep hearing, I'm sure all of us hear every day as we follow this, every day we hear more urgent messages coming through, almost daily. So I don't mean to scare you, but I think we all need to get busy, okay? So here's some things. We need to get out of the oil and gas business, okay? Now that's gonna hurt people. So in terms of justice, how do we make a just transition? How do we move people out of oil and gas and get them into renewable energies? It is the biggest single source going into that's creating this greenhouse gas glut that's causing our global warming, global change, climate change issues. So how do we do this? We need to halt all public investments in this. Buying pipelines by the government is to me crazy stuff, right? And it's corporate socialism, really, right? It's giving money to the wealthy companies to do these things. We need to eliminate pension plan, institutional investments in fossil fuels. We need to divest. We've had students here that have been working on divestment along with faculty and staff to get us to divest. Okay, 1 minute. We need to assist oil and gas workers so that just transition. As a forest biologist, we need to think about the impact. Think of the heat dome that happened and the fires that followed. Think of the flooding. We're going to have more climate emergencies. And so here's my solutions. Phase out. We should really stop using fossil fuel driven vehicles as much as possible. And here's my win-win-win. I'm just going to stop with this. I've been walking, snowshoeing, biking to work almost every day. Not all, but most days I do that to get to work. Here's just a quick thing that I want to say. The one thing that Paul Ehrlich told me, and if you know, he's the author of the Population Bomb, I met him and I asked him, what should I do? He said, live close to work. So, and I do. I bought my place intentionally at the bottom of the hill. I have to climb that hill through the forest. But here's the advantage, win-win-win-win. No gas, diesel emissions. No fuel expenses. No depreciation on my vehicle, so I do have a vehicle. I use it just occasionally. No parking fees. I connect with nature every day. And of course, for mental health, that's been shown to be really important. Exercise for my physical health. I get exercise built in just to getting to from work. Bird watching time. I'm a bird watcher. Botanizing. I love plants. I work with plants all the time. I'm keeping track of berry picking. I get to eat food as I come along the trail when the fruits are ripening. Creative time, photography time. I love photography. I tell you, there's so many reasons to do it. And yet, what do? Get in our single occupant vehicle and drive up and down this hill, which, by the way, takes a lot of gas. Okay? I'm going to stop there, but thanks for.
Thanks so much. All right, thank you. And I like how we just championed through the moderator actually asking a question that we're focused on. So before I hand it over to the next panel member, I might just make the question focused. All right, so questions are, how can Prince George support a growing community while preparing for future climate impacts on the North? And what role? Sorry, buddies. Here we are. I want to come, so I'm honored. So, rewind. Based on your research, your friends are probably like, stress just went up because of my oversight. Okay, Christine, stay on task. Based on your research, what socio-ecological climate impacts are we experiencing and might expect in the region? And then what climate solutions do you propose to address those impacts? All right, who would like to go next? Awesome, do it up, sister. And if you'd like to maybe give a little bit of context.
Yeah, of course. My name is Annie King. I have my Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies from the University of Regina. So you think you know cold in Saskatoon, Regina gets colors. I will take absolutely any opportunity to plug my Saskatoon. I've got a lot to say about Saskatoon, but we're talking about the North today. So at the U of R, I did quite a bit of actually more the science side of climate. I spent a couple years in youth science education, and then I moved over to science research. And so I was working on a project where we were looking at the impact of farm ponds, or the prairies we call them dugouts, but farm ponds, on the global carbon budget and whether that's contributing to or helping out with climate change. So are they carbon sinks or sources? Turns out it's not actually straightforward. It's a little bit of both. But the older ones, the deeper ones, the more sheltered ones, curious, are carbon sinks. So now that's all interesting for me, but I think I found more interest in the interface between humans and climate. And so that's where the socio-ecological part of this panel, I think, is like a great fit. So thanks for inviting me to speak here. So my research here is more about the human interface between people, or the interface between humans and climate. So my research is on community engagement in resource extraction. So it's between an Indigenous group up in the Northwest Territories called the Saskatchewan and Métis, and an oil field that's in the process of its closure and reclamation. So it's been there for 100 years. It's Canada's longest onshore oil field. And they're pulling out. And so what does that mean for the people in that community, and what kind of impact do they have on closure and reclamation? BC, if we're bringing it back to the BC context, it's a different structure of management. But between my research and between what I know about BC and what I know about Saskatchewan, I know, and we all know as scholars, that there is a huge lack of consideration for Indigenous perspectives. In BC, we also see a lot of legislated acceptability of a lack of consideration. We also see a lot of attention paid to the earlier parts of environmental impact assessment and the earlier parts of projects and resource extraction, but we don't talk about the closure, and we don't talk about what impacts those leave on the people of the region. And so that's what I'm looking at. Northern Canada is experiencing warming at 2 or 3 times the global rate. And we also know that Indigenous people peoples all around the world are experiencing the burden of climate change much higher than many other populations. And so that's kind of a special cocktail up in the north of faster warming, heavier burdens. We're seeing an infringement on an ability to maintain a preferred lifestyle. We're seeing a lack of Indigenous determination and sovereignty and ability to direct development in their communities. So there's another note that I have written that I should have had earlier. When we talk about closure, we're talking about mine closure or pipeline closure or oil field closure. Something that we talk about a lot is the process of restoring soil, removing the infrastructure, but we don't talk about how to remediate the social and cultural aspects of land. Like, how do you restore a relationship with land? How do you transition a local economy off of a resource dependency? And so my climate solutions are that we need to understand that environmental justice as a lens is one set. Environmental justice and Indigenous environmental justice don't necessarily come from the same worldview, and we have to combine those. If we're going to support our Indigenous peoples in northern Canada, especially in northern BC in their transition, we need to recognize Indigenous epistemologies and ontologies and how that affects how a whole people can experience justice and injustice. Northern Indigenous peoples don't necessarily even view nature and humans separately. There isn't a divide. And so how can we be talking about resource extraction when nature is a commodity? So we have to shift our viewpoints, our ontologies. We have to learn from Indigenous people and listen to Indigenous peoples to understand what justice is going to look like for them in terms of the climate. One arrangement that allows for a good measure of Indigenous determination is the development of co-management regimes. And there's a lot of critics of co-management, and read my thesis for more on that. But co-management regimes allow for a lot of Indigenous sovereignty and power and determination over their lands, over their traditional territories. And so just broadly, respect for Indigenous rights, opinions, attitudes, and worldviews are not just of Indigenous people. And that is my contribution. So, Joe, question? Oh, you have it.
Great. Rochelle votes.
Okay, I get 7 minutes?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, clear my clock.
Resume.
Okay.
There we go.
So I grew up in Southern Ontario, and the ski hill I learned to ski on was a golf course. Well, in the summer it was a golf course. It is no longer a ski hill, so that disappeared. But that was like my first introduction to snow and outdoor recreation in the wintertime. It's really what's driven my interest as a researcher because I love studying things in the mountains. So I try and do field work all the time, when I can. And I've done research in the Coast Mountains, Rocky Mountains, Himalayas, traveled in Peru, Bolivia. Lots more mountain ranges to see, but that kind of informs my research, right? Environmental, climate change, and focus on that region. So that includes meteorology, hydrology, mountain glaciers, and snowpacks. Art mentioned the IPCC report. I was really surprised in my first year geography class asked who heard the news about the new report. No one had heard of the IPCC. 100 students. Well, they weren't 101, but anyways, most of them, one of them had heard of it in another course. But the most recent report came out in March, and I'm going to quote it here because it's a great quote. The scientific evidence is unequivocal. Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. Pretty stark stuff. That is the second report. The first report that came out last year of this 6th edition, I guess, was the scientific basis, and this was studying the impacts of climate change, so really relevant to what we're doing. I'm going to give you the litany, I call it, the recital of impacts of climate change in the north, just so we're on the same page. As I mentioned, warming, greatest in winter and spring, larger in the north as well, as Amy mentioned. We're seeing rates 2 to 3 times the global average. We are seeing things like the unprecedented heat dome event in June 2021. Statistically, absolutely insane event. And one of the questions now is that a new thing we're seeing? We've never seen this before. Statistically, we shouldn't ever see it, actually. So is this something happening? It's also just happened in Antarctica. Just this week. 7 standard deviations above the average temperature observed in the center of Antarctica. So as Art says, not a warming, but a much less cold. We are seeing glacier retreat across Western North America as temperatures rise. Okay? Part of that is because snowpacks are being diminished. There's less snow falling in the winter and more melt in the summer. That will continue for the foreseeable future. We are seeing changes in snowpacks, particularly at lower elevations. And this change will progress upwards towards the tops of the mountains as climate change proceeds. Really rough sort of calculation is if we get 4 degrees of warming, you could expect an increase in the sort of bottom elevation of the snow line of about 600 meters. That's a lot. Okay? Our mountain ranges speed up to, what's Ross, 3,400 meters or something. Most of our mountains are below that elevation, and so small change in snow line has a big impact towards snowpack. We're seeing changes in the timing and magnitude of stream flow as snowpack. So we're seeing more precipitation falling as rain in the winter, less as snow, and so it changes the whole timing of our river system. You will see one very small silver lining is reduced snowmelt in spring because there's less snowmelt. Okay? All of this leads to things like more wildfires, earlier snowmelt disappearance, decreased soil moisture, more risk of wildfire, longer wildfire seasons. This is already playing in UNBC. And we see things like intense precipitation events increasing, exactly like that atmospheric river in the fall. These are all things that were projected to happen 30 years ago as these reports started coming out. There's big consensus reports, and it's happened. Okay? That's the litany, and it's really depressing to sort of sit and think about this stuff all. It's really easy to fall into what we call doomerism. Wow, this is what's happening. There's nothing we can do about it. But it's really important not to let that take over. Apathy is really dangerous. We need solutions like people are proposing here. I think it's a great session to do it. I think it's amazing that most of these solutions are already out. We just need to act on them. And so I'm actually going to propose not specific things because, we can have a huge discussion about exact policy measures of things. It's important to know that they work. Yeah, 1 minute. Policies work. Ozone hole, right? Acid rain. These are things that government policies were able to work to avoid. So what I'm going to suggest is that we need really bold, innovative, and systemic changes. It's not enough to do incremental individual action. Okay? Governments, industries, everything has to be on board with large-scale changes. And to make that happen, we need motivated people to organize, and vote, and run for office. General speech.
Three tough acts to follow. My name is Kristen. I'm working on a PhD in Chaco. I'm not going to talk much about that because I'll be defending you in a year. So Joe kind of went through the litany of things that are problems here. So I did my master's at UNBC, but all my work was in Manitoba. And the work was cool. It was on large scale agriculture. I'm originally from the Midwestern US. But when I finished up my master's, it's okay, what am I going to do next? And I was thinking about going back home to the States. That was 2016, so elections happened, and I decided to stay in Canada. But part of the bigger reason for staying here and staying at UNBC and working on the Chaco is that I think the place is really important. It's really important to me. So I didn't want to go do another fly off and there's really cool work being done all over the place. But if I'm going to be in Prince George, I want to be working on stuff that the people in this community are going to care about and actually
you know, maybe I'm not gonna make a huge change in the world, but like for this community, hopefully I can do something. So then the Chaco has a zillion problems. And when I was reading this prompt, I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna like stand up here and rail about dams. Because like a lot of people don't even realize that, you know, the Chaco is run by Rio Tinto. They determine flows. This dam was put in the 50s without telling anybody, flooding out First Nations. Their cemeteries are still flooding. So I was just gonna go on a tirade. But I took a step back because I think the thing that has been the biggest impact on my own research and on folks here is wildfires. So instead of the litany, I'm going to focus in really, really on wildfires. And the first thing we think about is like what happens in a place like Litton, and it's just like devastating. There's nothing you can say but devastation. And I actually happened to be driving to Seattle in August. Drove to Seattle, fine, came back, all the roads are closed. So that's my first like thing, like I could be trapped in Seattle. But let's fast forward to the atmospheric rivers in November. I'm again driving to Seattle. And I'm driving through Litton, and as a person who studies wildfires in Chaco and who studies sediment, I'm like looking up at this slope and I'm just like, this is bad. Like there's no vegetation, all there is dead trees. And like, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic, but like it started drizzling on me. And I'm like that, yeah, this could be bad. By the time I get to Abbotsford, it's just like I can't see anything. It feels like you're in monsoon. And the next day I wake up to a text from Shea being like, holy crap, did you see what happened in BC? And so to me, wildfire is the thing that I just like there's so many things that we think of first is losing human life and losing human property. But the real devastation of wildfire is what comes afterwards. And we're not immune from this in the north. We see the socio side of things when folks have to be evacuated from George. And do we have like the infrastructure in place? We did in 17 and 18 mildly. Now we have to think about if 20,000 people were to come here, it's also, we're still dealing with the pandemic. So all these things on top of each other. And the other thing I think about a lot as a person who's like care about growing my own food or going to the grocery store and have like supplies. Like, so what if those roads that blow out, what if that wasn't the mainland? They could have gotten things from Seattle or could move things by ship. Like, what if that's us in the north? Or what if Highway 16 has a big washout and, Terrace and Rupert are completely on their own? Like, we've got big issues in the north. And I think sometimes it's just easy to forget, like, well, there's no people up here, so if it burns, it burns. It's like, yeah, to a certain point, that might be right. So I think for me, that's the big thing when we think about solutions. Like, we can't stop wildfire. We've tried. I mean, like, settlers have tried for many years. We're gonna have cut blocks. You can't log our way out of wildfire. We're gonna spray so that we don't have aspen that comes back. Well, aspen's good at stopping wildfire in its tracks. We have all these issues. So to me, the solutions don't come at the forefront in trying to stop these fires or fight these fires. It's what we're doing to build resiliency in our own community. So what is Prince George doing to build resiliency, not just for the people that live here, but in the surrounding communities, places like Fraser, like Art talked about that. They've got dead pines still all over the place, just getting hammered with these fires. So to me, that's the solution. Is like I know there's like a lot of work being done on food security in Prince George, but it goes beyond that. It's just like building a better social infrastructure for when these things inevitably do happen, because not trying to be a doomsdayer, but like these are things that are going to happen. And in my view, it's like we have to stop being so reactionary and be proactive and build these things. Awesome.
You almost think that the coordinators engineered that dialogue, because we touched on so many different. Great, so let's open up the floor. Any questions, comments, thoughts? How are we feeling? I don't kind of like right? Who here has heard of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change? So hoping everybody's doing awesome. So we're doing it. Yes, go ahead, Cindy.
I just want to comment with the description of my emotional reaction, so it's not a question. That I have some teariness in my eyes, and it's not on the doomsday side of things. Just to say that, these are 4 individuals that are representative of a wider momentum, that the hope that I hear in all of your voices is like absolutely inspiring. And I think that's a good place to start from. So just to say thanks.
Especially the knowing. Like, despite the fact of all that they know, they remain optimistic, right? So according to the recent IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the 3 priorities, which was touched on by all the panel, is for the North, which, you know, they essentially see Canada, is drought, flooding, and wildfire. So I thought maybe I'd ask the panel, with those 3 in mind, which one do you find the gnarliest? And then if you had one thing you could do, and we have the power to do it, what would it be?
What were 3 drought, wildfire?
And floods. Oh, so wildfire, drought, and floods. Those are our primaries, right? For Canada, those are our primaries. Those are the big banker ones. And I'd like to point out, when we talk about insured losses, times that by 3. Insurance only covers about 30% of the loss to Canada. So the Florrie Murray, it was, that year, it was 7.8. I don't know, a ridiculous number, billion of insured losses. So this is costing us as taxpayers. Just so of the 3, which one is it that you find the gnarliest? And if we all said, okay, we're ready, what should we do as a community, as a global community? What would you say? Okay, do this.
Okay, I would say the flooding first. I think those floods in the ones on the Lower Mainland, the Southern Interior, in the fall of 2021, pegged right now at $10 billion in damages. And I worry that they're just being rebuilt. So what I would do, if I could do anything, is build, if we have to keep this system in place, build more resilient networks, right? You can't have these disconnections happen. You can't have Terrace and Rupert shut off from the rest of the highways all over are a really important corridor. Railways are really important for goods. So just building more resilient transportation networks, and I worry that they are not being the way that will account for future.
So if the humans continue to build in the high hazard areas, which we did,
Guess what's going to happen?
and again, it happens because it will. You're saying all of our linear infrastructure requires far greater resiliency. Would you lump in IT with that? So our information technology,
Sure.
right? Because I think that's how it sometimes falls off the table. And then we talk about equity, economic equity, being connected is the one way that we can address that to some degree, especially where we're remote. Okay, next panel member, Kristen, what do you think?
Well, I just talked to about wildfire, so.
Yes.
But I'll, I guess I'm gonna go with floods only because I've seen the power of water. And we have every time I think humans, we think that we have some way to like stop this. We have like the power of water is just so incredible. And those images were just like, I don't know, they're earth shattering to see what's happening and seeing people like in Abbotsford having to protect a pump house. And then learning about the history of like, well, this river was like diverted and so it stopped this lake from occurring. We've already kind of like mucked with everything. And so that's gonna be one of the most difficult things to stop and prevent. And like Joe said, just like building the same highway in the same spot is kind of a fool's errand. What would I do? I think a lot of it needs to be restoring rivers to natural flows. So like, yeah, we don't see flooding. Like the Chaco might not flood anymore in the spring because of the reservoir. But when there's like the big release that has to happen in August for water temperatures, we do then see flooding. So I think a lot of it just has to come back to, rather than engineering our way out of this, it's like we need to just go back to what a lot of these systems already were doing. And it's not going to be without pain and more money, but it's probably the only way forward.
So accessing our natural assets, honoring the natural ecosystem services that are provided at free of charge that we continue to annihilate. I may have a bias. I think that was awesome. No one said Moderator, you can't be, got to chime in there. All right, Annie.
I apologize to Art because now I'm going to take the other one. I'm taking Drought. So you'll just have to, I don't know. Hail. Maybe you'll talk about hail. From the prairies, I guess I am probably biased as well. I see drought as maybe a less catastrophic, maybe a less in-your-face issue, but it's a slow build. We see droughts on cycles, and we are seeing that we are well overdue for a drought in Saskatchewan. We're heading that way. And I think our economy is like 11-12% based on agricultural export. So it's huge, but it's not the center of our economy. And we can adjust, we can make a whole bunch of no-till farming, winter planting, do all kinds of things to mitigate the effects of drought, but that's coping, that's not adapting. So if we're talking about the resilience and vulnerability side of things, I think we have to look at transformation. I think that maybe we just have to look at, these prairies have been drying out for centuries. It's happening on a cycle, and it looks like it's going to be the worst one yet. I guess we're going to just keep planting the weeds in prairies.
But instead, you have an entire community ready to go saying, what should we do? Anything. Just throw it out there. What should we be doing? With your magic wand.
Oh, no. I think we have to walk away from agriculture in poorly adapted agriculture. I don't mean Saskatchewan should walk away from agriculture, but I think we need to move away from poorly regionally adapted practices and maybe look at using our land for other things. That's not much of a magic wand, but I think it just speaks to what you guys said. We're doing the same thing, and we're seeing that things are getting worse, and we can't just keep pretending that, okay, maybe if we just do something slightly differently, it'll be better. We'll build back the same highway, but with slightly different material. Oh, we're still in the day. We use a slightly different farming practice. We are still at the mercy of
One eye to that, with drought, Saskatchewan running out of water, or at least from a seasonality perspective, what is the most essential input that humans require? Let's go to selfish thoughts. Water security. You're hoopy-doopy without it, right? We've got 3-4 days, right? I mean, food, 40, 30, 40. Water, you're hooped, right? So it's a huge issue. I love how she's like, it's only 11-12% of the economy, I'm like, water security. We need water. To transport water for all of Saskatchewan, it's ridiculous. Think of the cost, right? As well. We pay taxes.
I'm going to throw one more thing on there.
You do it.
We're looking at this massive infrastructure project right now. Former Minister of Emergency Preparedness, Ralph Goodale, is sort of in the champion of it. And we're looking at moving water from Diefenbaker, which is kind of central Saskatchewan, further down. Like you said, there's a lot of issues with diverting water, and we're just talking about diverting water from the north to keep doing what we're doing. And so those infrastructure projects build resilience, but they also work within the same
Perpetuation. Yeah. Get off that hamster wheel, humans. All right. Art, take her away, buddy.
I'm going to agree with Annie. I grew up in Saskatoon, right? So how can I? But even when you look at the drought in the southwest of the U.S., which is a tremendously important area for providing food for our continent and for the globe, they've had 7, 8, 9 years of drought. It's unprecedented, and it's going to cause major impacts on us. I also think that up here, we're a much lower rainfall area up here. If you're thinking just more our community, I think I'm more worried about drought than flood. Droughts lead to fire, oftentimes because droughts are often associated with intense heat, and I think that evaporates water much more quickly. I'm actually thinking drought up here in our region, but recognizing that we're connected so much to the southwest, and all the agriculture that's going on down there. So a little bit of a toss up for me, but I would think drought globally is the real issue. They're talking about large parts of entire countries that will not grow food anymore in the coming decades. This is shocking, right? Southern India, you know, in different parts of India where that I've heard about. So I would say drought.
Okay, so now as a community member, local community, we are ready. We are ready, set, go. Art, what should we do?
Walk to work. It's funny, I just think there are these win-win-win things that you guys can do and that's what we should be looking for. And they're all over the place. I've just mentioned one because it's just so rich for me. But I just think of the things that we can all do. That's what I would suggest you do. Really think about your practices and be intentional about what you're doing so that I mean, none of us can afford to stand back and get a free pass. Everybody needs to be involved. And I totally agree with Joe. It goes beyond just our personal, the things that we do personally. And I totally agree. We've been asleep at the wheel with our democracy for too long. Democracy requires our participation and involvement. I've never run for office, but I certainly have been quite political. The reason is that it is our future at stake. If we just keep valuing money and investments over life, we've got to get in there and have our say.
Nice. A working democracy takes work. Get over it and get to work. And let's elect some real leaders and incorporate good governance. Okay. All right. Questions? Let's open up the floor. I greased them up a bit. I mean, I got some more. All right. No, actually, I'm put it to the audience. Based on what you've heard today, what is and we're all waiting. We're all ready to go do this. What are you going to do? You. I know. Okay, get ready. Okay, so if you could just throw out one thing, I want us all to go do this. What would it be? And you could do it. Okay, I have to maintain a safe space. Brother, if you want to say pass and come back to my room. Awesome. All right, today. I know that's not.
I already spoke. Yeah, I mean, I think at the collective level a lot. So I think and devote a lot of my time and energy towards the encouragement of the political expression. Of course, we have to seek out and support leaders that are going to carry these issues forward, and also at the policy level, thinking how we can be more deliberative, inject more deliberative democracy into our policy making. So systemic change shift through politics and policy.
So if we're all standing by, may I take from what you said, you would mandate everyone 18 and over have to vote or they're fined.
Drop the age to 16.
Yeah, I was confining myself, wasn't I? I needed to confine myself with paradigm instead of ripping it back.
Sure, and just to add to that, I mean, the youth arguments within those spheres of politics and policymaking, I think it's absolutely important to amplify. So and that's why I mean working in this educational setting, so rewarding, because you have groups of students organizing things like this that actually include politicians, they include community members. So yeah, I think that youth perspective is all
Get back to you, brother.
I
am feeling a little bit, Are you guys ready?
I moved here.
Nice. So I take two things from that. One, if everybody could share their stories, right? Instead of going, no, that's just small stuff. Like, Eric going, well, you know, it's just small. It's like, no, share your stories, right? So share your story. It was like, God, I was kind of nervous. Like you put yourself out there. You made yourself vulnerable. I was a bit nervous about leaving my car behind, but I did it. And you know what? I adapted. Whoop, whoop, right? Humans, we adapt. The second one would be, could we say, City of London and how everybody just thought it was just crazy for the City of London to say, there's going to be a fee if you drive downtown during business hours, right? And everybody in the globe was like, are they crazy? As it turned out, it was a great measure. So how about saying, gas has to be $3 a liter or more. Okay, and of course we'll have offsets for the people that rely on their vehicles. Like everyone, I immediately hear all the truckers and my family driving to the rigs and they're like, oh, I need my truck. It's like, okay, so it wouldn't apply to you. We're talking about the pleasure cruisers. People are like, yeah, I can walk to the grocery store, but I got a car. No, $3 a liter. So we could do that. The incentive, you have to have the purpose, right? I know I was taking some liberties from the story, wasn't it? Woo! All right, who is next? And someone awesome.
I'll jump in actually with a question for everybody. We've been talking a lot about the solutions and like the creating the systems level change, but I mean, we see there's a few of us here, and I assume we're all passionate people in the room. But there's a lot of people who aren't part of these discussions, aren't involved in this kind of work and creating the solutions. What would you say for getting more people involved in climate solutions and making that change really happen?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of us in the room, and I don't think the people that are not in the room are unaware of climate change. I don't think you could have an Instagram account and not know about climate change. So people not being in the room, it doesn't mean they don't know, it's because they don't hope. Going through a whole degree of environmental studies, and it's heavy. It's really heavy. Like Joe was saying earlier, you can really get bogged down in this, but you just have to know that there's solutions, and it's a rapidly closing window. But I think to get other people involved, you can't emphasize the rapidly closing window all the time. Like sometimes you have to say, there's a window.
So a little bit of a timeout. Okay? It's like they might not be here, but they're humans.
You just need to know that there's hope and it's not all doom.
So it's the narrative, is like I said, the four of you, despite what you study, you're still putting forward optimistic measures. So it's the narrative, telling the story, right? All right, take her away, buddy.
I totally agree with Annie. And one of the the big worries is there's a lot of mental health problems. People are bogged down with all this environmental bad news, and it grows every day. So how do we stay in the game? Because look at me, Joe's coming along, you guys are coming along now. I've been in this business a long time. I don't enjoy being here. I could have done so many great things with my research that sort of, followed my instincts and followed different things. And instead I've been dealing with forests and carbon sequestration. I think we need to build resilience. We need to make sure, because some of the leaders here are in this room. We need to be resilient. And we talked about resilience. So how do we be resilient? And I talked to Caleb. I gave a guest lecture yesterday in this class about the Anthropocene. Probably all heard about that. And I was talking about haiku, poetry. And to me, it's just one of those things that's really helped me. And I think we need to keep all of us in the game, and we need to recruit more people to join us in this effort, because we can't do it alone. And I just think we need to build that resilience. And whatever you need to do, and I said, walking to work, part of that is resilience, because I'm physically fit, my mental health goes up, and so on. I'm very fortunate I don't have any serious mental health issues, but I know a lot of people who do. And they may have to take a back seat, because this is a hard thing to be in. But those of us that have enough strength, we can bolster that with doing various mindful things. There's all sorts of things you can do, right? Meditation, whatever is your thing. stay physically fit, stay mentally fit, and stay in the game, because this is only going to get worse. Sorry, but this is probably not a spoiler alert for you guys. A lot of people are actually really saying that we're going to go through one heck of pain, okay, and suffering, okay. Now, how do you listen to that and go, oh, great, you know, I'm retiring. Isn't this going to be fun? You know, my retirement is, I'm going to still going to remain very active. And, in fact, I just took on a PhD student this fall, and that's how optimistic I am. And Charlene is sitting right there. This is how optimistic that well, what other choice do we have? We can't give up on the earth. This is our only home. This is the only place we have.
Wow. Okay, so Joe, did you have any?
I would second a lot of those thoughts. I think what Annie said is probably true. There are, I would say it's the silent majority that is aware of the problem, maybe not motivated to do much about it, but, you know, would probably support government policies and measures that would slowly carrot and stick things into a better place. There's a very vocal minority that is opposed. That's because that's where all the money's coming from, right? So, you know, if you think about policies that governments put in place, most people are pretty supportive because they're there to help the society, help the economy, help all these things. I think, you know, smart government policies that do that will be supported. Yeah, the room isn't packed, right? It'd be great to have 500 people talking about climate change, but I think we're kind of in this place now where most people are just aware of it and just tired of hearing about it. It's, you know, it's a big thing. I do want to say one thing, the doomerism thing I brought up. It's really important to be aware of the big negative things that are coming and they're already happening. It's more to not be confused, to not say, well, that's where don't be bear witness to it, and the science that we're doing is documenting. You feel like a historian documenting all these bad things that are happening, but that's important to do.
The only thing I'd add is like, I think it's best to just try and meet people where they're at. Like, I ride my bike up the hill every single day, even when the weather's like today, you just want to jump off a bridge or something. But like, that's not how I'm gonna go talk to somebody who, like, so my cousin works at an auto body shop, so works on cars, needs cars to exist for his living, and has like no interest really in like solving climate change, about life, whatever. But I was talking to my mom who saw him yesterday, and he's like, oh, gas in the States right now is $5 a gallon where he lives, so he switched over to a small car. So to me, it's like, you know, thinking about just like, I'm not going to talk to him about like going vegan and riding his bike, but like encouraging small changes in behavior and not like shunning him because he works, you know, in the auto industry. Like, I think that's ways to like not only bring people into the like solution side of things, but also like solve a lot of the other problems we're dealing with, like just society getting so splintered. So like, yeah, just like know your audience, you know, try to meet people in a different place maybe than where you're at.
You.
To tie those, to pull up pieces of both of those, you talk about the very vocal minority. They're vocal because they don't see how climate change can be fixed, I think, and survive it. Like, their livelihoods are tied to the continuation of status quo. And so, I mean, it's a buzzword in a lot of ways, but a just transition, making sure that, you know, we're the vocal minority maybe at one end and they're the vocal minority at the other. And if we continue to go, you're not hearing us, well, we're not hearing them. So I think keeping our ears open to what these transformations would mean for all people, and making sure that we carry everyone with us.
That was a beautiful vote. That was a beautiful vote, I have to say. So that brings us to the end of the session. I want to do a shout out to our panel members. Thank you so much. That was awesome. It wasn't the coordinators who are also students, just like you know the rest of us, but yet they did all this. Awesome. And then So as it happens, there are other sessions coming up, including one on climate anxiety and eco depression. And that's tomorrow. And I'm actually on that panel. I'm really looking forward to it, actually. And then we have right after this at 2:30, we have, the questions, how we saying them correctly. And so that's the building sustainable communities, how can Prince George support a growing community while preparing for future climate impacts in the north, and the role of the university. So please join us. So check out the schedule online. There's lots more sessions coming up. Please join us. Like, this is just fabulous. Come with your questions, your curiosity, and your thoughts, and let's engage. And let's meet everybody where they're at. Thank you, folks.